The laughter hit me harder than the words. It was Thanksgiving night, the turkey still steaming in the center of the table, the smell of cinnamon pie floating through the air, kids running down the hallway with sticky fingers and squeals of excitement. When Brian leaned back in his chair, swirled his glass of Merlot, and smirked at me in front of everyone. "Still broke, huh? Guess some people never get out of the bargain bin." The words cut sharper than any carving knife. For a second, the room froze. The clinking of silverware stopped, the chatter died, and then came the chuckles. A couple of uncles smirked into their drinks. My cousin snorted into his mashed potatoes. Even my aunt shook her head like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all night. I felt my fork hanging mid-air, my hand trembling, and my ears burning hot. I glanced around the table, faces half lit by candlelight, eyes darting toward me then away, whispers under breaths, and I knew this wasn't just a joke. It was a label, a brand they had stamped on me for years. The broke one, the underachiever, the relative they could always count on for a cheap laugh. My chest tightened, but I didn't snap, didn't shout, didn't even flinch. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and felt the folded paper I had slipped in before leaving my apartment that afternoon. The paper that wasn't just paper, but proof. Proof that the story they'd been telling about me all these years was dead wrong. A bank statement, black and white, numbers that could silence a room. I pressed my fingers against it and thought to myself, not yet. Let him laugh a little longer. Let them all laugh. Because what Brian didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that the person they had mocked for years wasn't the same man sitting here now. And before the night was over, they were all going to see it. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know how we got here. Brian has always been the golden boy. Growing up, he had the new Nikes every Christmas, the flashy jackets with tags still on them, the trips to Cancun every spring break. He'd walk into family gatherings with his chest out, bragging about his new car or the bonus he got at work, and the room would light up like he was a celebrity. And me? I was the kid with 2 part-time jobs and a second-hand hoodie, the one driving a Honda Civic with rust creeping up the doors. I didn't mind working hard. I actually wore it like a badge of honor, but Brian made sure I never forgot my place. At birthdays, he'd nudge me when the check came and say loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't worry, I got it. I know you can't." At Christmas, when I brought gifts I could barely afford, he'd smirk, "Oh, thoughtful, even if it's from the clearance rack." Everyone laughed. They thought it was harmless teasing, just family banter. But trust me, when you're always the punchline, it sticks. I still remember last year's Thanksgiving, same table, same smell of turkey and gravy. I had just told the family I was trying to start a small side business, something I was really hopeful about. Brian leaned back, popped a green bean into his mouth and said, "So basically, you're unemployed." Nice spin though, the room roared. I smiled through it, but that night I went home, stared at myself in the mirror, and promised I wouldn't let them laugh forever. That promise burned inside me for months. While he was spending, showing off, flashing pictures of vacations, I was saving. Every extra dollar I had, I tucked away. I skipped nights out, packed lunches, worked weekends. I studied, I invested, I built slowly and quietly. And guess what? It paid off. My savings account grew, my investments doubled, and for the first time in my life, I looked at a number on a page and thought, I'm not broke. Not anymore. So this year, when the invitation came for Thanksgiving, I printed that statement and slipped it into my jacket. Not to brag, not to rub it in, but because deep down I knew Brian wouldn't stop. I knew he'd take his shot, and I wanted to be ready. So there I was, sitting at that long table, plates piled with stuffing and sweet potatoes, the glow of the chandelier above us, Brian smirking with his wine glass, calling me broke in front of the entire family. My heart pounded, my palms sweated, but my mind was calm. I looked at him, really looked at him, and thought, you think you've won. You think this is still the old me. But tonight, Brian, you're going to learn the truth. I took a sip of water, smiled faintly, and let the laughter around me fade into background noise. Because I knew something they didn't. Before dessert was served, before the night was over, I was going to change the story forever. Brian had a way of turning every gathering into a stage, and I was always his favorite prop. The thing about family is, They remember your lowest points longer than your victories, and Brian never let anyone forget mine. Like the year I borrowed money from my uncle to cover a car repair. Brian told that story every Thanksgiving for 3 years straight, always with a laugh at the end. Remember when you couldn't even afford breaks? Good thing family keeps you alive, huh? Everyone chuckled, forks tapping against plates, and I sat there swallowing humiliation like dry stuffing. Or the Christmas Eve when I showed up late because my shift at the gas station ran long, still smelling faintly of oil and coffee grounds. He greeted me at the door with a grin, shouting, "Fresh from the pump! Get him a shower before he touches the presents." The whole living room erupted. I laughed along because what else could I do? But inside, it stung. It always stung. And those digs didn't stop when I got older. Even when I finished school, even when I held down a decent job, he still found ways to twist the knife. At one family reunion, when I mentioned I'd finally paid off my student loans, he leaned back in his lawn chair, sipped his beer, and said, "Congrats, you're at 0. Big accomplishment." His friends laughed, and I felt that old burn in my chest. 0. To him, I was always starting from nothing, always behind. That's what fueled me. You know that quiet fire you get when someone underestimates you so badly you can't wait to prove them wrong? That was me. I took every one of his comments, folded them into motivation, and went back to work. I picked up side gigs, dog walking, freelancing, anything to scrape together more savings. I learned about investing, pored over books and articles while everyone else was binge-watching shows. I budgeted down to the penny, skipped nights out, packed rice and beans when others ordered takeout. Slowly, steadily, the numbers grew. And the irony? While I was grinding quietly, Brian was burning through everything he had. He bought a brand new truck he couldn't afford, financed vacations to Cancun and Vegas, flashed receipts for designer clothes. He made fun of my thrift store shoes while maxing out his credit cards. I knew because one night, after too many drinks, he bragged about juggling balances like it was some clever trick. I just nodded, hiding a smile, because I could see what he couldn't, the cracks in his shiny armor. But still, the family only saw what he showed them. They saw the flashy truck, not the monthly payment. They saw the Instagram pictures from resorts, not the overdraft fees. And me? I was still invisible. The quiet one. The broke one. That's why Thanksgiving this year mattered. It wasn't just another dinner. It was my chance. My chance to finally end the story he'd been telling about me since we were kids. Walking into my uncle's house that evening, I felt it immediately. The smell of sage stuffing, the hum of football commentary on the TV, the warmth of the fire crackling. Kids dashed through the living room. Adults balanced glasses of wine. The same cozy chaos as always. But under it all, I felt the tension, the anticipation, like waiting for a storm you know is coming. I carried my dish of mashed potatoes into the kitchen. Brian followed right behind, eyeing the foil container. "Store-bought?" he asked, eyebrows raised, smirk already forming. "Figures." His voice was low but loud enough for 2 aunts to hear, and they smiled politely, pretending not to react. I forced a chuckle, set the dish down, and walked away, my hand brushing against the folded paper in my jacket. Not yet, I thought. Let him dig his own grave. At the table, I took my seat across from him. The chandelier above us glowed soft gold, casting shadows across polished silverware and folded napkins shaped like turkeys. Conversation flowed easily. Football scores, holiday sales, who was bringing dessert. I kept my head down, chiming in when asked, laughing softly at jokes, playing my part. But inside, I was waiting, watching. And sure enough, halfway through dinner, Brian started. "So," he said, leaning back with his wine, "how's life in the bargain bin? Still scraping by?" His words sliced through the chatter. A couple of cousins laughed nervously. One uncle nearly choked on his green beans. I smiled faintly, feeling the paper in my pocket like a secret weapon. He had no idea. And that's when I realized, sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting back. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's letting the other person build their own stage, climb up high, and then pulling the floor out from under them. I looked around the table, at the faces watching, some amused, some uncomfortable, all of them waiting to see if I'd crack. But I didn't. Not yet, because the night was far from over, and dessert hadn't even been served. What Brian didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while he was laughing, while he was flashing receipts and bragging about credit cards, I was building something real. I didn't win the lottery. I didn't inherit money. I just worked harder than anyone realized. While he posted pictures of cocktails by the beach, I was delivering groceries on weekends, taking freelance projects at midnight, trading hours of sleep for hours of focus. I didn't care about looking rich. I cared about being secure. Every extra dollar I had went into a savings account or an investment portfolio I built piece by piece. I still remember the first time I opened the online banking app and saw a balance with 6 figures. I stared at the screen, refreshing it twice just to make sure it was real. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't broke anymore. But I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my cousins, not even some of my closest friends. I wanted to keep it quiet, to protect it, to grow it without noise. That's the thing people don't get. Money talks, but silence multiplies. Meanwhile, Brian's life looked shinier than ever. New truck in the driveway, pictures of a ski trip in Colorado, dinners at high-end steakhouses. But behind the curtain, I knew he was drowning. He'd called me once, months earlier, after a few beers, rambling about how he was juggling 3 credit cards, transferring balances back and forth to avoid interest. He laughed about it like it was a clever trick, but I heard the panic in his voice. I said nothing, just listened, storing it away, because I knew one day all his bragging would collapse under its own weight. And honestly, I didn't even plan to expose him. I just wanted peace, respect, maybe one Thanksgiving without being the punchline. But then he opened his mouth that night, mocking me in front of the whole family, and something in me snapped. As I sat there forcing a small smile, I thought about every sacrifice I'd made. The nights I stayed home eating pasta while my friends went out for drinks. The weekends I spent studying charts instead of watching football. The hours I worked 2 jobs, exhausted, just to pay off debts faster. Every sacrifice, every humiliation, every joke I swallowed had led to this moment. And tucked in my pocket was proof of it all. The bank statement wasn't just numbers, it was years of my life condensed into digits on a page. Proof that I had climbed out of the hole they loved to shove me into. Proof that the broke one wasn't broke anymore. I glanced around the table, at the faces that had laughed at Brian's joke minutes earlier. My aunt dabbing her lips with a napkin. My uncle reaching for another slice of turkey. Cousins passing the cranberry sauce. None of them suspected a thing, and that's what made it perfect. Revenge, if you can even call it that, works best when it's unexpected. I looked back at Brian. He was mid-story now, telling some tale about his last vacation, how the resort staff knew him by name because he tipped so well. He gestured grandly with his glass, his watch catching the candlelight. Everyone leaned in, entertained, even though I knew the truth. He had put that whole trip on a credit card he couldn't pay off. I sipped my water, calm, patient. You ever sit there knowing a storm is about to hit, and you're the only one holding the lightning bolt? That's exactly how it felt. My fiancé leaned over, whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. Yeah, more than okay. Because inside, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. Ready to flip the story they'd been telling for years. Ready to stop being the punchline. Ready to show them who I really was now. But timing was everything. I didn't want to pull out the statement in the middle of casual conversation. No. I wanted him to feel comfortable, arrogant, untouchable. I wanted him to laugh one more time, maybe even toast to himself before I placed the truth in front of him. So I waited. I let the night stretch on, let the food pass around, let the wine flow, all while that folded piece of paper burned against my chest, waiting to rewrite the story. The moment came when I knew it would. Dessert plates had just been cleared, the smell of pumpkin pie still lingering in the air, and Brian, never one to miss a spotlight, raised his glass, smirking like he owned the room. "Here's to family," he said, his voice loud and theatrical. "Even the ones who can't quite pull their weight." He looked right at me as the words left his mouth, eyes sparkling with that cruel little gleam I'd seen 100 times. The table chuckled again, some half-hearted, some genuine, but all of them at my expense. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't humiliation. It was resolve. I set my fork down slowly, the clink echoing across the table. Heads turned. The room quieted a little, waiting for my reaction. I leaned back, slipped a hand into my jacket, and felt the paper between my fingers. My heart was steady now, calmer than it had been all night. "You know what, Brian?" I said, my voice even but sharp enough to cut the air. "I'm glad you brought that up." He laughed, surprised I was even responding. "Oh? Gonna tell us about your bargain hunting skills?" A few people chuckled. My uncle smirked. My aunt shook her head like she was bracing for a cringe moment. I pulled out the folded paper, placed it flat on the table, and slid it toward the center. The sound of paper against wood silenced the laughter instantly. "No," I said, eyes locked on his. "I'll let the numbers talk." Brian frowned, confused, his smirk faltering. He reached forward, unfolded the sheet, and the moment his eyes landed on the balance, his face drained of color. 6 figures, clean, black and white. No excuses, no jokes. Just truth staring him down in ink. The room was dead silent. You could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. My cousin's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against his plate. Someone gasped softly. Brian's lips moved, searching for words, but nothing came out. He glanced up at me, back at the paper, then back at me again, like his brain couldn't process it. That can't be real," he stammered. His voice cracked, and for the first time ever, I saw fear in his eyes. "It's real," I said calmly. "Dated last week. Would you like to show yours for comparison?" Gasps around the table. My aunt covered her mouth. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in his glass of wine. My fiancé squeezed my hand under the table, pride shining in his eyes. Brian tried to laugh, but it came out hollow, pathetic. "Well, numbers don't mean everything. I mean, you probably—" I cut him off. "No, Brian. For years you've called me broke. For years you've humiliated me at this table, turned me into your punchline. Tonight it ends. I'm not broke. I never was what you made me out to be. And now everyone here knows it." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Nobody dared to laugh. Nobody even breathed too loudly. The image of Brian, usually so smug, now pale and speechless with my bank statement in his trembling hands. That was the moment everything shifted. My aunt finally broke the silence, whispering, "Good for you." Another cousin muttered, "About time someone shut him up." The tide turned, and I felt it washing over me. Brian dropped the paper onto the table as if it burned him, his eyes darting around, desperate for someone to back him up. But nobody did. Not this time. His empire of jokes had crumbled in an instant. I sat back in my chair, calm, collected, watching him squirm. "Guess some people never change," I said softly, echoing his earlier words, and the sting in his face told me he felt every syllable. The rest of that dinner felt like an entirely different world. The same table, the same candles flickering against polished silverware, but the atmosphere had flipped. The laughter that once came at my expense was gone, replaced by awkward silence. The kind that settles in when the truth finally cuts through the noise. Brian sat stiff in his chair, cheeks flushed red, his glass of wine untouched, his hands fidgeting with the napkin like it could somehow save him from the weight of humiliation pressing down. My aunt finally broke the tension with a polite cough, trying to steer the conversation back to football scores, but it didn't matter. Everyone's eyes kept darting toward me, toward the bank statement still lying on the table like a piece of evidence no one could unsee. My fiancé leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "You didn't just shut him up. You changed everything." I nodded, but inside I was still buzzing, my heart pounding with the aftershock of what had just happened. You ever stand up for yourself after years of staying quiet, and suddenly the silence is louder than all the insults put together? That's what it felt like. Victory doesn't always roar. It sometimes sits heavy in the air, undeniable, unshakable. Dessert came out, but nobody touched it right away. The pumpkin pie, usually the highlight of the night, sat cooling on the counter as people whispered, shifted in their seats, and tried not to look at Brian. He tried to laugh again, to make some weak joke about numbers don't buy happiness, but even his closest allies at the table didn't join in this time. His smirk was gone, and without it, he looked small, almost fragile. That's the thing about bullies. They only look big when no one calls them out. Strip away the audience's laughter, and suddenly they're just another insecure man hiding behind noise. By the end of the night, relatives I hadn't spoken to much came up to me quietly, patting my shoulder, whispering, "Good for you," or, "About time he got put in his place." One cousin even said, "You know, I always hated those jokes, but nobody ever stopped him. Tonight you did." Their words didn't erase the years of humiliation, but they felt like bandages over old scars. On the drive home, the air outside was crisp, the streetlights glowing amber on the wet pavement. My fiancé looked over at me, pride shining in his eyes. "I've never seen you like that," he said. I exhaled, staring out the window, the adrenaline slowly fading. I didn't plan to, but I couldn't let him win again, not tonight. He squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I knew something had shifted forever, not just between me and Brian, but in how my family saw me, and maybe even how I saw myself. The days after Thanksgiving told their own story. Word traveled fast. Family group chats buzzed quietly, cousins sharing their version of the night, aunts calling each other with whispers of, "Did you hear what happened?" The story spread, and with it, Brian's grip on his golden boy image slipped further and further. At work, apparently, he even snapped at a coworker who mentioned family money talk. He hated that it followed him. And the irony? A week later, my phone buzzed with a call from him. I stared at the screen, his name flashing, my gut telling me exactly what it was about. I let it ring twice before picking up. His voice was shaky, hesitant, nothing like the loud arrogance he carried at that dinner table. "Hey, listen," he started, clearing his throat. "I might need a little help. Things are tight right now. You know, just temporary, maybe alone." I almost laughed out loud, but I held it in, letting the silence stretch. He rushed on. "I mean, just a few thousand. You've got it, right? I'd pay you back, of course." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city lights, and finally said, calm and steady, "You called me broke, Brian. Remember that?" He went silent, completely silent. I could almost hear the weight of his own words crashing back down on him. "I'm not broke," I continued, "but I'm also not your safety net. You'll figure it out." And with that, I ended the call. No yelling, no gloating, just truth. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong once. It's watching them choke on the lie they built when you refuse to play their game anymore. Looking back now, that Thanksgiving wasn't just about a bank statement. It was about reclaiming respect, about ending years of being the punchline, about showing myself and everyone else that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means patience. And when patience ends, it ends with power. You ever had someone mock you for years only to crumble the moment you reveal the truth? Trust me, there's no sound in the world like the silence that follows. And the funny thing is, every Thanksgiving since then has been different. He doesn't joke anymore. He barely speaks to me at all. And when he does, his voice carries that edge, that caution. Like he's scared I'll remind everyone again of the night the tables turned. And maybe I will. Or maybe I don't need to. Because the story has already been written, the balance has already been shown, and the truth will never leave that table.